In our last video, we spoke about the fourth dimension and how our brain processes it. A small portion of this video will be an overview of what we are processing. But even more, in this video, I want to tell the story of how these concepts came to be. So let's look into history. Dr. Carl Jung was a young psychologist just receiving his degree in 1902, compared to Sigmund Freud, who received his degree in 1881. Jung really resonated with Freud's work, especially the thought of the Oedipus complex, which is a drive in early childhood around 4 years old to kill the father and marry the mother. The name came from a Greek myth in which exactly that happened. To Jung, the idea that people all go through the same process all around the same age seems to prove that it is innate in our species and must be passed through our DNA. If this is the case for this stage of development, so should it be the case for other concepts. If we all have genetic material influencing our behavior and stages of development, shouldn't this be seen throughout the ages in literature and other themes seen throughout time? So he looked and found many examples and collectively called them archetypes. Some archetypes include the persona, the self, the anima, the animus, and the shadow. Freud and Jung hit it off quite well at first. They had a long 13-hour conversation about these topics. They often analyzed each other's dreams to become more aware of their unconscious. Freud was by and large credited with bringing the concept of unconscious mind to the masses with his psychoanalysis. He was an atheist Jewish man who went to medical school at the time that psychological treatments included locking patients away and not trying to help. It was also a time of anti-Semitism, so he had an uphill battle being recognized by his community. On top of this, his psychoanalysis was to interpret dreams and basically relate everything to sex. This didn't sit well with the elite of the community. He was not well received at all. That is until Jung saw the brilliance in his theories and pushed them, explaining them so others might understand. With Jung's help, Freud became an extremely important figure. Freud claims that he saw Jung's anti-Semitic nature early and even asked him to not let it get in the way of psychoanalysis, which was Freud's baby. He wanted the world to adopt his work, but he needed Jung's help. Jung wasn't Jewish and was a natural leader. He could get people to understand the theory. In fact, Jung did just that. He made Freud's ideas accepted. Unfortunately, this didn't last long. Jung started to say he thinks that not everything should be related to sex. But Freud vehemently opposed this and asked Jung to promise not to leave the sex-based ideology. Jung reluctantly agreed, although he didn't really know why he did, because he wouldn't be able to keep his promise. In 1912, he published Psychology of the Unconscious, a study of the transformations and symbolism of the libido. In the book, he explained that the libido isn't just a drive for sex, but a generalized psychic energy. This, along with other transgressions, such as asking if he could treat him more like a father than a friend. In Freud's perspective, a child wants to kill his father, but Jung saw things differently. Jung was molested by a friend he looked up to at 18, so a father figure seemed less threatening. Freud took Jung's distancing from the sexual model as proof of his desire to kill him and take the glory and rewards of Freud's theory. This, along with dreams he had disclosed and Freud's own experience wanting his younger brother dead at an early age, convinced him Jung subconsciously wanted him dead. After the two men parted ways, Jung was deeply hurt. He needed to understand why his friend couldn't empathize with him, why he took things so far out of context. Like he does always, Jung looked into history to find the answers. He came across two early Gnostics whom became some of the earliest fathers of our church, Tertullian and Origen. These men were very opposite in the way they thought. Tertullian was a very structured and rigid man. His beliefs revolved around if God says something, then that is absolute, undeniable fact. He is not to question the intended meaning, but to take all words as self-evident and unquestionable. Origen, on the other hand, loved to pontificate on intended meanings of Scripture. Also, he would bring other Gnostic sects' ideas and pontificate all ideas. To Jung, he saw that the two men were opposite on the introversion-extroversion dichotomy.
Jung specifically stated that Tertullian was an introverted thinker. I want to jump ahead and show a more current understanding and example of introverted thinking. It is a predictive function that keeps track of order over time. Rules are very important, and strict adherence is paramount, or the world will devolve into chaos.
Next!
Excuse me, but I have some concerns about these questions. Just look. See, this first question makes no sense. Like, how many car lengths should you leave in front of you when driving? There's no possible way to answer that. A car length is not a standardized unit of measure. Look, question 2. When are roadways most slippery? Now, okay, there are 3 answers, none of which are correct. The correct answer is when covered by a film of liquid sufficient to reduce the coefficient of static friction between the tire and the road to essentially 0, but not so deep as to introduce a new source of friction.
And what sort of man was Freud?
Well, he was a complicated nature, you know. I liked him very much, but I soon discovered that when he had thought something, then it was settled, while I was doubting all along the line. And it was impossible to discuss something really à fond. You know, he had no philosophical education, particularly, you see, I was studying Kant, and I was steeped in it, and that was far from Freud. So from the very beginning, there was a discrepancy.
Did you in fact grow apart later, partly because of a difference in temperamental approach to experiment and proof and so on?
Well, of course, there is always a temperamental difference. And his approach was naturally different from mine because his personality was different from mine. That led me into my later investigation of psychological types. There are definite attitudes. Some people are doing it in this way, and other people are doing it in the other typical way. And there were such differences between myself and Freud, too.
Do you consider that Freud's standard of proof and experimentation was less high than your own?
Well, you see, that is an evaluation I'm not competent of. I am not my own history or my historiographer. With reference to certain results, I think my method has its merits.
We are now back to the 4th dimension. Although Jung had no idea this is what underlies his theories, both Tertullian and Freud were very aware that objects mean to them, and both Origin and Jung are aware of the bigger picture, incorporating objective reality into their ideas. For Freud, if you saw a snake in your dream, it is clearly a reference to the male genitalia and can be nothing else. For Tertullian, a man may not be divorced and must only have one wife because God said so. Jung disagreed with Freud. A snake could represent many things for many people, based more on family line. An extreme example would be a horse. It would be silly to think a horse's family line thought a snake meant male genitalia. A horse has a very quick, aggressive attitude towards snakes because a snake represented threat to their livelihood. Origin also enjoyed looking at things more objectively and brought different Gnostic ideologies together. But he knew this had a downside. Instead of taking a strict oath to one ideology, he castrated himself to be immune to the dangers of not taking a strict oath. Jung also saw that there was 4 other cognitive processes, which are thinking, feeling, sensing, and intuition. Each cognitive function has an introverted and extroverted variant. In the last episode, I spoke of intent versus interest. That is shorthand for introverted feeling versus extroverted feeling, respectively. My theory that I bring to you takes neuroscience and mixes it with Jung's theories and even some Freudian concepts. These are not easy to put together because they have clashing terminology, and some concepts need to be updated. This will probably be one of the more unrelatable episodes because it deals with figures from the past. I just felt that the story needed to be told, not only to honor the amazing men whom changed the world for the better through their self-awareness and made these theories possible, but also as a reminder to be humble. Freud lost his best friend over a misunderstanding. Same with Jung, who searched through time to better understand him. When the Nazi Party came for Freud's family, Jung sent people to save his family. Freud was too proud and angry at his anti-Semitic friend. Eventually he found his own way out and continued to ignore Jung's pleas to speak to him. Eventually Freud died, and Jung knew his hope to reunite with his friend was over.
Thank you for staying so far. If you haven't already, make sure to watch my video explaining the 4th dimension. Don't forget to hit the like, subscribe, and comment. Until next time, take care.